good morning, depending on where you're calling from. Welcome to session 2 of EdRedesign's Institute for Success Planning virtual learning series. We have a story to tell, empowering communities to tell the stories, their stories of impact. I am Tauhida Jackson, the director of the Institute for Success Planning and deputy director for EdRedesign. And we are so happy that you're able to join us today for this learning series. If you can put your name and your affiliation in the chat box, we just want to welcome you and be able to shout out whoever's on the call. Thank you for joining once again. Over the past year, we have prioritized storytelling as a mechanism to communicate positive impact happening in local communities as we implement personalized relationship-based strategies to move the needle towards positive progress for children and families at the Institute for Success Planning. Part of that storytelling journey was to be able to work with local communities as they realize how powerful they have the power that they have to be able to tell stories and the importance of them owning not only their own data but embracing the stories of their local community. We are here and we'll hear from 3 of our pilot communities that have been a part of a broader pilot that was designed by our cross-sector leadership advisor, Chris Shelton, who you will meet in a moment. But I wanted to be able to tell a little bit about the journey that she has taken as a doctoral student, spending the last year working with us to be able to not only build out a storytelling strategy for our local communities, but also for her to be able to build out a toolkit that will be used and released to the broader field. We are so happy that you are able to join us today and to be able to celebrate Chris as she moves toward presenting her capstone as a part of her doctoral studies, but also to celebrate the contributions that she has made to our organization. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Shelton.
Good morning and welcome. Michelle, do you mind advancing the slide? Thank you so much. All right. Well, I am so excited to be here with you to be able to share some of the work that I've been able to do with EdRedesign. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to get us started with a community builder to build some connection. We're going to talk about the power of storytelling. We're going to do some knowledge building around the collective public narrative impact. And then the part that I am so excited about is the community showcase, where we're going to invite 3 of our communities in to share their origin stories related to success planning. All right. EdRedesign made a very intentional decision about leveraging a storytelling initiative. Part of what they wanted to lean into was the idea around sharing the stories of progress, growth, and positive impact that the communities that we're working with are actually engaging in. It's extremely important to our organization that we are amplifying the voices of the communities that we're working with, and also using this as a tool to be able to scale and sustain our success planning initiatives. We realize that there's power in storytelling to help our communities acquire funding and resources and support that allow them to scale and sustain the storytelling or the success planning work that they're doing. And then ultimately what our big goal is to drive outcomes and improve outcomes for children and youth in that way that we're able to advocate for policy change that allows us to have those outcomes. All right. Now, before we get started, it would not be true Chris Shelton form unless I shared a bit about my story and who I am and what brings me to this work. So I am proudly from St. Louis, Missouri. I am the daughter of Reuben and Deanne. Shout out to my parents because they are on this call supporting me. I began my professional career in St. Louis as an attorney. I quickly realized that that was not my true calling that God had on my life. And so I decided that I wanted to transition into education. I joined Teach for America, and I stayed at my placement school for 10 years, working with the amazing kiddos that you see on this screen. That is my true why. It's the brilliance that exists in these kiddos. But what I quickly learned on my journey is that you cannot out-coach or teach your way around a broken system. And I wanted to better serve the kiddos that I work with and drive better outcomes. So it was at that point that I decided I would come to the Harvard Graduate School of Education to learn more tools to be able to reimagine what education could look like for Black and Brown students. And so I got my master's degree and then entered into the EDLD program. I was fortunate enough to meet my amazing supervisor, who you just met, and learn from her and Professor Paul Revel about the work that they were doing with the Institute for Success Planning. And it was in that moment that I knew I wanted to join this team to further work on building relationships with children, youth, and families with a caring adult to drive the outcomes that students like my kiddos back in St. Louis absolutely deserve. So when I learned about their storytelling initiative, I knew that I wanted to be on board to help them with this work, and I can't wait to share more of it with you today. I also want to give a little shout out because it's not just about my kiddos, but I have family members that are young Black boys and wanting to drive outcomes for them, like little Kai Kai that's in the corner at a George Floyd protest that we attended. All right. Now, this is kind of a celebration where we're going to share some of the work we've done. We're going to do some knowledge building, and you can't have a celebration without prizes. And so, as a way to get us to engage more in the chat, right, I want us to think about every time you engage in that chat, you have a chance to win Professor Marshall Gantz's new book, People Power Change. All right. So every time you participate in the chat, your name will go into a drawing. And at the end, we're going to give away 2 copies of this book for people to be able to win. Storytelling is truly relational. And even though we're not in a room together, we can still engage. All right. So keep that in mind as we move on to the community builder. I have to tell you that in my culture, we believe that it takes a village to raise a child. And there are many caring adults that I could lean on and count on. But today, I'm going to introduce you to one of my caring adults. My caring adult is my loving grandmother, Elizabeth Shelton. She is my caring adult because she loved me unconditionally. She showed up for me in every way possible, and she always had my back. What I want you to consider is, who was the caring adult that played an important role in your life? That person could have been from your childhood, or they could have emerged for you in your adult life. And in a few words, I just want you to identify that person. You can do it like me, by role and by name, or whatever makes you feel comfortable, and tell us, how did that person positively influence your life in just a few sentences or short phrases. All right, I'm a middle school math teacher by trade, so I'm going to give you some think time and a little bit of time to put that in the chat, and then we'll come back and elevate a few of those. All right, and don't forget, don't miss out on your book, the opportunity to win, so make sure you're sharing about your caring adult in the chat. Dorothy, thank you so much. We already have someone in there. She's shared her caring adult who showed her what it can look like to have meaningful impact on kids' lives. Yes. Penny, my sorority sister, your mother, thank you so much for sharing. It's beautiful to see all of the caring adults that you've had in your lives and the impact that they've had on you. And I see my mom with my grandmother that I never had a chance to meet, but who played such a pivotal role in her life. Yes, thank you so much. What the chat is showing is the impact that having that caring adult can truly have on our lives and the difference that they're able to make. Yes, thank you so much to the Sweeneys, your grandfather. Yes, oh, who played chess every weekend. Such powerful stories. Yes, the caring adult can truly make a true impact in your life. And so, what I want you to know, there is a method to my madness. So, I want you to hold on to that caring adult that you had in mind, because we're going to revisit that a little bit later when we engage in another activity. All right. Thank you so much for sharing. We're getting all your names entered for that drawing, and I cannot wait to award you one of those amazing copies of the book. All right. Thank you, Michelle. We can go to the next slide. All right, we want to do some norm setting before we go deep with this session. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to be fully present. We know that people have a lot going on and we appreciate you being here, but we really want to lean into it so this can be relational. We're going to listen to understand. Folks, as you can already see in the chat, they are sharing things that are very personal to them, and I appreciate your vulnerability. So we want to make sure that we're going to honor confidentiality in what we learn in this space. This is my supervisor's favorite, be a croissant, not a donut. So we are going to stay open-minded to everything that is presented here. Yes, Tawhid, I'm calling you out. That's all you. We're going to step up and step back and be mindful if there are opportunities for airtime. Stick to protocol. honor time. And the one that I really think that we need to lean into is this idea around accept non-closure. With storytelling, you are constantly iterating and adjusting your story for the audience. So when you leave, you're not going to necessarily leave feeling like, oh, we have it all figured out. You're going to leave probably with more questions and curiosity that are going to make you want to dive even further into this. All right. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why did EdRedesign want to leverage storytelling? Why is this the decision that we wanted to make? There is true power in storytelling. If you go back to ancient hieroglyphics, to the West African griots, or people like my grandmother that I shared with you, Elizabeth Shelton, storytelling is the way that we have traditionally and historically communicated, connected, and made sense of the world. So what storytelling allows us to do is the amazing communities that we work with in success planning, it allows us to showcase the assets and the strengths and the wonderful work that they're doing in those communities in a way that is easy for all of us to understand. So what happens sometimes is there are complex social issues that makes it very difficult for like those of us that are not engaged in that work regularly to understand. But what storytelling does is it makes it accessible to all of us. If you think back to the civil rights movement, when that movement was being created, it was through storytelling that we were able to share the struggle and what was happening that brought people together to really demand that change take place. So what happens is storytelling positions us to answer a call to action because it motivates and it pulls on our emotions to make us want to answer that call. One of the biggest things that's come out of my work is this idea that storytelling allows us to reclaim power. What happens in many communities like mine in St. Louis is that there's a narrative that people create about it, that it's unsafe, it's dangerous, and all these terrible things. But when we write our own stories, we can talk about the beautiful things that are happening in our communities, the strength of our communities, and really own what we want people to know and think about our communities. So there is this true power that happens in storytelling, and that's why it's such a powerful tool for us to be able to leverage. All right. So when I was able to join this amazing team at EdRedesign, we thought about what's the problem or practice that we really want to address. And so what we leaned into this idea is we want to provide support for communities to help them more frequently and effectively tell their stories of impact, but we don't want it to stop there. We want those stories as they're uplifted to inform and make people aware and lead to broader systems and policy level change. So that is what we leaned into as we were thinking about this storytelling work. What I value most about EdRedesign is that they take this idea that we do not design or create for, we design with. And so as I thought about this storytelling pilot, I wanted to honor that culture that they built. And so as we thought about how should this storytelling be rolled out? Well, we thought let's start on a smaller scale. Let's start with a signature pilot program, test out some ideas, get some insight from the community, and build together instead of building for. So we invited 3 of our amazing Institute for Success Planning communities to the table: Chelsea, Massachusetts, Dayton, Ohio, and Orlando, Florida. I have to tell you, you're so lucky to be able to hear from these teams later in the call because they are absolutely amazing. And so I engaged in 3 coaching sessions with each of these teams for 1 hour each. Our curriculum was around learning an adaptive public narrative framework by Marshall Gantz that I'm going to share with you. We explored ways to elevate the voices of children, youth, and families because we believe in passing the mic, that it shouldn't always be our voice. And then we learned about how to create a robust storytelling culture. Now, I have to tell you, these teams leaned in. They showed up for one-on-one coaching so that we could see the evolution and they could be coached through their stories. And we also resulted with a deliverable of their success planning origin stories that I cannot wait for you to hear at the end of this call. All right. During our pilot, one of the frameworks that we leaned into is the one by Professor Marshall Gantz. It's the public narrative framework. There are 3 stories that come together to share the story around the work that people are doing or a call to action or the change that they're trying to implement. There's the story of us, the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. So what I want to do just a little bit of knowledge building before we get to the actual stories and share with you what this framework looks like and how we adapted it to meet the moment for our collective impact work. Again, I mentioned to you that storytelling through public narrative, it is so important because we are combining different strategies. So first we have the head. That represents the data and the strategy that we're bringing together. It's the plan that we have, right? More of the technical piece of it. So you have to have that part because you have to have an idea of how this thing is going to actually unfold. The second piece that we bring together is the heart, and that's where storytelling comes in and where it is so useful. The heart is where we are able to evoke emotions, to bring up those emotions in people that make them inclined to want to act or use their hands to answer a call to action. It is the combination of the head and the heart that makes people feel like they need to do something, they need to be a part of the change. And that's why storytelling is so powerful and important in this work. Again, this is just if you're visual like me, I like to see how it all comes together. And so it's those values that we tap into, those shared values that I'm going to show you how we're able to develop in the story of us that then trigger those emotions. And it's those emotions that make people want to act and answer that call to action. Now, if you notice on the right side, in the second picture, what you'll see is that the things that we want to draw out from people, it's a sense of urgency, right? We want them to feel like I have to act now. It's a sense of anger that something has to change. And really importantly, it's a sense of hope that we believe that this is possible and this thing can change, a sense of solidarity. And in our belief that we can actually make a difference. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how we can do that. And then we're going to model it in the stories with our communities. All right, let's lean into the story of self. So what happens is in the story of self, Michelle, you can go to the next slide. The story of self is around the individual leader and who they are and why do they care? Why were you called to lean into this initiative? Why do you care about this work? And who are you as a leader? What values do you have? Now, Professor Gantz points out something that's really important that I bet is true of many leaders on this call. As leaders in this work, we often feel like, you know what, I just want to put my head down, I want to do the work, and I want to be behind the scenes. But what he says is that we do not lean in and tell our own stories. Someone else will tell that story for us, and they might do it in a way that we do not like. He thinks of this storytelling as an act of leadership that we are required to lean into. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to explain to you how what happened is I realized that I would need to adapt. Michelle, if you don't mind going to the next slide. What I realized is that I would need to adapt the public narrative framework because in collective impact work, what's happening is that we have cross-sector entities that are coming together to attack an initiative. So there is no one individual self that we're leaning into. Instead, what we have is multiple organizations that are coming together to solve some complex problem. So instead of having an individual self, we needed to create the story of the collective. How are we coming together to engage in this work? But what that means is with success planning, we have 4 different organizations that typically come together to create what we refer to as the core 4. Well, each of those different organizations, they have different priorities, they have different ways of being, they have different things that are important to them. So what we have to do is come together, think about what is our shared identity in this collective impact work? What are the things that we value most? And that is how we come up with the story of the collective, collaboratively figuring out what is this new organizational identity for this group that is working together to attack this complex social issue. All right, that leads us to with the story of the collective, when we apply it to our success planning, we think about why was our community motivated to engage in success planning? I'm going to use success planning as a frame of reference because that is the work that we are doing. And these are the questions that they would consider. What challenges did they face in their community that made them to decide that they wanted to engage in success planning? What were the key choice points that made them say, this is what we want to do and this is why we care about it? So similar to the story of self, we have the story of the collective where that group together is talking about why this work is so important. So you understand who they are as a collective, why they're engaged in this work, and why it is important. All right, that then takes us to the story of us. The story of us is where we really start to dig deeper and we want to create a sense of solidarity with our audience. And the next slide, Michelle. In the story of us, the first thing that you would want to consider is who is your audience? That is so important for storytelling because what happens is we are going to cater the work that we're doing and the way that the story is developed to what that audience cares about. So the next step we think about is what shared values do we have between our community and the audience? And we want to tap into those values so that we can say, this is what matters to them. And together, these things matter to both of us, tapping into the shared values that we have. What we really want to think about, is there a shared experience that we have had with us, a shared moment that we can lean into that shows why we both care about this thing and why we both want to move this needle forward? One way that you can figure out if there's a true shared moment between you and the us is to figure out, are there moments where you saw a physical reaction to something? You're going to hear later about a group that shared, and everyone in the room had an emotional response, which triggered and let us know that that was a moment that the us shared together. And you tap into those moments to show the shared values and the solidarity that creates. So we go from two separate entities to a collective that feels like a us in solidarity to move this work forward. All right. That takes us to the story of now. I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite parts of this framework because this is where we get to the call to action. The story of now is how we bring it all home. There is an explicit call to action that we are asking people to answer. Professor Gantz talks about the fierce urgency of now. So what that means is we are using sometimes data, sometimes story moments to make people feel like they have to do something immediately and in this moment, that they can't take it anymore, that they are angry, that they want things to change. That's what we're trying to make people feel in the story of now. And you're going to see some of the communities that we bring in to share their stories, the way that they do this, where you feel like you have to do something. One of the great ways that Professor Gantz talks about this as well is around the idea that there's the nightmare and the dream. And this creates a true sense of urgency often when you juxtapose these two ideas. And so the nightmare is, this is our current reality, right? This is what's happening, the status quo. And if we don't act right now, if we don't answer that call to action, then things are not going to change. They're going to stay the way that they are. We then create a sense of hope. We talk about what's possible. If you answer this call to action, here's what's possible. Here's how things can change. And here's how, when we come together as that us, we can truly make a difference. And we end that with a clear and specific strategic ask about what we want them to do. And when we think about that ask, sometimes it's tough because we need to be able to know whether or not they answered that call to action. So it takes some intentionality around when we're developing it. What happens then is you bring those three stories together and we link the narrative, okay, so that there's some cohesion between it. Now, storytelling is all about having moments, a specific moment that you draw people in so they actually feel like they're in the story with you. Each part of the story is going to have these key elements: the story of the collective, the story of the us, and the story of now. They'll have specific storytelling moments that we lean into. They'll have a challenge or dilemma that we address in each part of the story. There's a choice. That choice represents agency that we made where we signal that this was extremely important to us. And then there's an outcome that shows the values that we have and the hope that we lean into. All right, here's the fun part where we get to lean in together. I'm going to model a moment for you. Now, I know if you remember back to the community builder, I told you about Elizabeth Shelton. Well, this is my grandmother, my Elizabeth. And what I want to do now is I want to lean into a storytelling moment about my caring adult. When we lean into these moments, we want to be really specific and create vivid details so that people feel like they come into that moment with you. You want to think about, what sounds did you hear? What did you smell? What did you feel? What textures were present, right? So the more specific imagery that you can use, the more that people will feel like they are coming into that moment with you. All right, now my grandma just had her birthday, so I'm gonna try not to get emotional, but I really want to bring you into one of my favorite moments with her, because this little woman was she was small, but she was mighty and absolutely amazing. All right, so here we go. I want you to come along with me back to the summer of 1989 in St. Louis, Missouri, with 9-year-old Chris. All right, now anybody that's been to St. Louis in the summer, it is extremely hot. I can remember the beads of sweat dripping down my face because of the thick, warm, humid air. It's so thick that you feel like you can cut it with a knife, almost so much that it feels overwhelming. But all of a sudden, you'll feel that cool summer breeze run across your face. I remember biting into the sweetness of an orange dreamsicle popsicle that the bomb pop truck, Dee and Mary, had dropped off for the day. If you're from St. Louis, you know we call the ice cream man the bomb pop truck. I remember my grandmother coming and saying, "Come on, y'all, get on this swing with me." and all of my 4 to 6 cousins running over with her to jump on the swing and snuggle up beside her. Because when grandma calls, you come running. Now, I have to tell you, we were all fearful because this was an old rusty swing. And many times in the past, that swing had fallen down because of all the cousins that had loaded on top of it to join my grandmother. But like I said, when grandma calls, you come running. In the darkness, my grandmother's voice would get deep because it's late into the evening, and she would start to tell us about Aunt Carolina Jane. Now, Aunt Carolina Jane is not just any woman. Aunt Carolina Jane is a woman from Mississippi that can turn into a bird. As a young child, didn't quite understand it, but I knew it scared me to death, and I would want my grandmother to tell me this story over and over and over again. And I kid you not, every time she got to the climax of the story, you would hear some thump in the night that would scare us all. All the cousins would jump up and we would go running into the house, scared to death, but super excited that my grandma had shared this moment with us. Now, we yearn for these moments because it was the closeness and the connection that we had with my grandmother. It was in those moments that I felt loved and I felt protected because my grandmother was my safe space. She always showed up for me. She always made me feel loved no matter what was happening. Now, I know that you have some similar moments with your caring adult, and I want you to bring us into those moments. So, what I want to do is I want to give you some time to think about what moment did you have with your caring adult that you can bring us into? I want you to lean into some vivid imagery. You might not use all of these factors, right? Professor Marshall Gans says, we get on the bicycle, we test it out. Okay, so I want you to lean into it as much as you can, try some of these factors, and share your moment in the chat with us so we can hear about some of those amazing moments that you had with your caring adult. I'm going to give you a little more time for this one. Again, middle school math teacher, give you some think time and then some time to type it up and get it in the chat. I am good with the silence. It's not uncomfortable. So I want you to take that time, lean into it, and engage in the chat. And we'll make sure to get your name entered into that contest so that we can get some winners for the book. All right. I can't wait to see your moments. I see beautiful moments that are coming into the chat. Thank you so much for sharing. Ron, I see that you've put a beautiful moment in the chat. Would you be willing to come off mute and share your moment with us?
Yeah, sure. I was a D- Algebra 1 student, and my geometry teacher noticed it and asked me to TA his algebra class. Little did I know I'd be teaching lessons in less than a few weeks, just little mini lessons. And he goes, here's what you're going to do. I didn't prepare, and I got up there and someone said, "How do you do number 12?" And I floundered, couldn't do it. And I had that feeling that I never wanted to feel again. And I saw him back there just smiling at the learning that was happening. He did not bail me out. And what a powerful way of, you know what, that didn't happen to me ever again, not as a student, not as a professional.
What a powerful moment. Thank you so much for sharing, Ron. I do want to create space if there's anyone else that would be willing or would want to share their moment with us. I would love to be able to give it some space in the room for others to be able to hear. I'm going to give us another moment before I move on. Adam, I see you shared a very powerful moment in the chat. Would you be willing to come off mute and share it with us? My good friend from St. Louis. We have St. Louis in the house. Great to have my Midwest buddies here.
Happy to be here. Hey everyone. Hey Chris. Yeah, I do remember it was my senior year, early senior year, and I was trying to make my college decision. Didn't know what to do. I was in a small graduating class. We had 40, so everyone was really going somewhere different. So it wasn't like, all right, well, 10 of us are going. So didn't know which way to go. And also just thinking about the price differences. But I brought up all those concerns to my French teacher and advisor at the time. He just sat me down and really just kind of comforted me. So I didn't have a word for it at the time, but I was very anxious about it. And it was a big decision, but really quieted down that anxiety, allowed me to just see all the options and know, there's never ever going to be a perfect decision in life. But you just got to make the best decision that you can and work through it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Adam, and for allowing me to put you on the spot. That's my
Of
teacher
course.
buddy. We've been in the trenches together. So thank you so much for sharing. It's
For sure.
amazing the power that a caring adult can have on a child's life, and just how folks have modeled in the chat or come off mute and shared with us. There's so much power in how it can change what happens with someone. And in the same way that someone has helped us, we want to make sure that we are having that same impact on kiddos and folks that are coming up. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. I know that it can take some vulnerability, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Michelle, you can go to the next slide. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you so much. I want to engage in a little conversation around some of the tools that we decided to come up with in order to work with our communities to be able to share their stories, to be able to share the moments just like you did. And so one of the things that we knew, it was important that this was about co-creation and collaboration. So as we thought about the storytelling toolkit, we sent a survey out to communities to ask them, what is it that you would need in order to be able to effectively share your stories? And we actually got 43 survey responses, which shows the ways that our community is willing to interact with us in the success planning community of practice. And so what we did is we created a minimum viable product. And what that means is we took the ideas that they had, along with some of the things that we knew from research, such as with Professor Gantz's public narrative framework, and we created a product that we could put out into the market meaning our Institute for Success Planning Community of Practice and other folks that we've worked with, to ask for their feedback so it could guide the tool so that we make sure that it's extremely useful for those that we are serving. Because the one thing that you never want to do is create a tool that folks don't want to use. And so that's what the spirit of EdRedesign is about. It's about co-creation and collaboration. And we put that MVP, the MVP of the storytelling toolkit, out with our community, and we were able to get wonderful feedback that has allowed us to shape it into something that we truly will help and empower communities to be able to tell their stories, implementing that feedback into the toolkit so that we're ensuring that it's useful for the communities that we serve. All right, so there are some really great resources in there that folks like Ron and other communities that we have worked with have helped us to really shape and bring together. I really want to say thank you to the pilot community because we could not have gotten to this point without you and the other communities in the community of practice that gave us such great feedback and insight. So there's many tools and resources, some of them that I'll share with you. There's an overview of key storytelling frameworks that make storytelling accessible to anyone, right? We also wanted to make sure that this storytelling work is not something that's meant to be a one-off. It's meant to be something that continues and becomes a part of the organizational culture that exists in communities. And so we had to talk about how do we create a robust culture of storytelling so that it lasts beyond just that initial support that we provide. It becomes a way that we do business. We also put in tips on ways that we can combine data and visuals and narratives so that we're engaging the audience, because often it's that combination of the visuals and the story that I'm telling that really draws people in. We have a wonderful research director, Lynn Sachs, who talks about data and how we can utilize it. So we built in some of her wonderful work as well. So folks can utilize that data, particularly in the story of now, to show what the current status quo is and how we can improve upon it. Something that is extremely important to EdRedesign and the work that we do, you can see it across our streams of work, is the importance of engaging families and creating trust with children, youth, and families. And so we really leveraged that and talked about ways that communities can do that. Because I'm gonna tell you what I've learned from back home in St. Louis, and I'm sure that you're very familiar with, is that if people do not trust you, they will not share their stories with you. And so we really lean into how do we help the caring adults foster and build that level of trust so that folks are willing to share. You're gonna hear about how folks in our pilot were able to build that trust and some of the things that were shared with them so that they could create these beautifully rich stories. We also provide additional resources, interview questions, preparation that you should think about before when you're going to elevate the voice of a child so that you can prepare them to be in that space. And then other resources that you can use to make what feels complex and very difficult to explain much more simple. You'll especially hear about that from Orlando and the way that they explain their work in a way that is accessible to everyone. So super excited to officially launch this toolkit because we do believe that it will help communities more frequently and effectively tell their stories of impact. All right, there's a few key resources that folks have uplifted that have been particularly helpful. One of them is the storytelling strategy worksheet. So as we talked about in the story of us, one of the first things that you consider when it comes to your one of the first things that you consider when you're telling your story is who is your audience. And so what we wanted to do was create a worksheet that allows people to go through your communities, to go through each of these steps to think about what values do we share? Who is my audience? What's important to them? So that you're not trying to figure it all out all on your own. There's a worksheet to guide you through this process. The second key piece that we wanted to lean into is the storytelling repository. Michelle, if you could go to, thank you so much, is the story repository. So what happens is our Institute for Success Planning communities are doing amazing work, as are many of your communities. And so you have these rich stories that are happening on the ground with navigators where they're learning wonderful things about kiddos and they're helping them grow and reach their goals and leaning into their strengths. But often it's difficult for those stories to make their way back up to leadership. That's where the story repository comes in. We're able to input our stories into this simple Google form so that we can share them and also to be able to preserve institutional knowledge. So we plan on sharing the format for this so that folks can start to implement and start preserving those stories so that you can lean back into it. There's a beautiful story where Jeffrey Canada talks about the impact that he had with Wes Moore when he was a young man. Imagine if we're able to capture those stories, and when the young people that we've worked with go on and do these beautiful things, we can share our part in that story and how we supported and uplifted them and helped them to get to some of these places. So we want to preserve that institutional knowledge and have those stories accessible so that we can lean into them and uplift them to our communities. All right. This is the part that I don't know if you've been waiting for it, but I have absolutely been waiting for it. And I am so excited to share some of the work that our pilot communities have been doing. When I tell you they have leaned into this and they have come up with some absolutely amazing stories. So from that pilot, these stories evolved and they're absolutely wonderful. So I want to get us started because I know you're probably tired of hearing me, so you can hear the voices of our community, the communities that have been working on this. And so first up, we have our Omega CDC partners representing the Hope Zone in Dayton, Ohio. And as they thought about their story, they thought about their internal staff as the audience and how can they generate additional support and buy-in from their staff members. So without further ado, I want to invite Mr. David Baxter to the virtual stage. Now, let me say this. It is a virtual stage, so if you hear something that resonates with you, I am from a call and response culture. We might not be in the same space, but you can give that love and support in the chat. So let's hype them up. If something resonates, drop it in the chat. Amen. Yes, that's wonderful. Make sure you're dropping that in the chat. So without further ado, I welcome Mr. David Baxter to share the success planning origin story for Omega CDC.
Great day, everybody. Thank you, Chris, so much for this amazing work. We're super excited about telling our story. Jasper Person here and David Baxter to be able to share this story of the work that we've done. So we we started off with in this work, obviously being able to immediately tap into the story of the collective and what that looks like. And I'll start off there and we'll kind of share, kind of go back and forth between the different areas that we have. So I'll begin now. So it began with a mandatory 7 a.m. meeting. About 20 of us gathered in a small conference room, unsure of why we were there or what we were about to hear. The air was thick with unease and curiosity, but when Vanessa made a purposeful walk to the front of the room, emotion filled her face and charged the entire atmosphere. It became clear that this was no ordinary meeting. Vanessa began with a stark reality that only 8% of our third grade students had passed the Ohio third grade reading guarantee. In other words, 92% of the students tested were not reading on the grade level, but were being promoted to the next grade with no additional support to improve their ability to read. These weren't just statistics. These were stories of untapped potential, of futures slipping away, of children being failed. When she slammed her hand on the table, her voice thick with emotion, and repeatedly said, "This is unacceptable." She made it clear we could no longer wait for others to change this. It was up to us. She followed explaining what a Promised Neighborhood grant was and our intent to apply for nearly $30 million to be invested in Northwest Dayton. When our team heard of the dollar amount, an audible gasp filled the room, but Vanessa made the need undeniable. Painting a stark picture to the reality that we were facing. She challenged the idea that we could help and we could keep throwing nickels and dimes at a problem that decades in the making. One that demanded deep transformational investment to drive real change. Most importantly, she made it clear that the people of Northwest Dayton not only deserved the investment, but also that we were ready and capable of stewarding the resources to create lasting impact.
The story of us. In that room, none of us fully grasped what lay ahead, but we all knew it was significant. Over the next 2 months, Omega CDC's partners answered the call for help, rallying behind this effort in extraordinary ways. Organizations like Learn to Earn Dayton worked alongside us, not only helping to review and refine the grant application, but also meeting with us regularly to go over every last detail, lending their expertise and reaching out to their networks to amplify our efforts and garner support. It felt like the entire Dayton community was all in with us, connecting with their networks, explaining our vision, and making the case for the need for the initiative in Northwest Dayton. Receiving the Hope Zone Promised Neighborhood Grant was an incredible achievement, but it was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead, turning our vision into reality by implementing the plans outlined in our application. Our top priority was success planning. Why? Because every child deserves to know their worth, recognize their talents, and believe that they can achieve just as much as students across the river. In partnership with students and their families, we committed to investing in their futures, helping them discover their passions and supporting them in reaching their full potential. No matter the challenges they face, we will walk alongside them, working together to navigate obstacles, build on their strengths, and celebrate their successes. reminding them every step of the way that they are capable and valued. Since that day, Omega CDC has proven time and time again that we will honor that commitment. In the spring of 2022, 63 students were at risk of not graduating from Thurgood Marshall High School. The call for help went out, and we answered. Every available staff member rallied, showing up at the school daily to tutor, mentor, and support these students as they work through missing assignments and regain their confidence. The Omega CDC team leaned on each other's strengths, collaborated, and remained committed to the mission that no student was alone. The results? Out of those 63 students, 51 proudly graduated that year. Omega CDC's commitment is more than just a promise. It's action that delivers real change. When third grade reading scores showed only 8% of students reading at grade level, we refused to stand still. By the end of just one school year, that number had climbed to 27%. The power of community is unstoppable. When people come together with a shared purpose, real change happens. We saw this firsthand with the response to these reading scores. We rallied parents, equipping them with the tools to help their children succeed. Our out-of-school programs were transformed and laser focused on building reading skills. Community volunteers showed up. And when a call for reading buddies went out, our team didn't hesitate. Despite full workloads, staff members gave 2 hours a day, 1 or 2 times a week, to sit beside struggling readers, offering not just help, but hope. Omega CDC doesn't just rise to challenges, we lead the way. With passion, purpose, and an unshakable commitment, we answer the call every single time. That moment when Vanessa's hand struck the table and her voice declared that the status quo was unacceptable marked the birth of what Vanessa affectionately refers to as an army of love. It was fueled by the collective heartbreak of seeing a system fail the children of the Hope Zone and by the determination to create something better. Rachel told us that when the system doesn't work for our kids, we create a new one, and we are building a new one through success planning.
In just 2 years, we have grown from the 20 who gathered in that conference room to 70 plus person army of love with no sign of slowing down. The goal remains the same: to ensure that the students of Northwest Dayton have the same educational opportunities and successes as those in the highest performing districts. If we fail, it's not just the children who lose, it's all of us. Imagine a child leaving elementary school, not knowing how to read, struggling through middle school and high school, and growing up never understanding the power of education or the doors it can open. Failing means allowing those barriers to remain unbroken, letting opportunities slip away, and watching as another generation is left behind. It means entire futures are determined not by potential, but by circumstances. We have the power to change. The dreams of the children of Northwest Dayton are in our hands. And if we don't give everything we have, those dreams may never become reality. We cannot let the nightmare come true. This work is hard. There's no denying it. It demands long hours, creative thinking, and relentless determination. But it also demands heart, passion, and belief. Every plan we create, every late night discussion, and every obstacle we overcome brings us one step closer to building a system where all children have access to opportunity. We have already made a significant impact, as you've heard. Our hard work is evident in the relationships we have built with students and families, the partnerships we have forged, and the programs we have implemented. But we know this is just the beginning. As we and when we succeed, and we will, everything changes. Imagine a Northwest Dayton where every child is set up to succeed, regardless of zip code or family income. Imagine classrooms filled with confident, inspired students, guided by success planning, and equipped with the resources they need to reach their full potential. What does all of this mean to you? Whether you are a student success navigator, a family coach, a manager, or an Omega CDC team member, it means this: fulfilling the promise of hope requires us to aim higher and to do better. When we do better, test scores improve, graduation rates improve, communities improve, and the lives change for better. We have already made a significant impact, but there is so much more to do. To make success a reality, everything we do must be better than we think it should be. It means looking beyond what's on paper, our data, goals, and job descriptions, and pushing ourselves to go further. It means showing up daily with a mindset to exceed expectations, fulfill our commitments, and never ever need to settle. For good is enough. Doing better is about honoring the trust families and students place in us and always striving for the impact they deserve. This is our moment. The stakes are too high and the consequences are too great for anything less than our very best. Together, we have the power to make the difference. These students and this community deserve it. So let's ask ourselves, how can we be better? How can we give more, push harder, and grow stronger? Let's ground ourselves in the purpose that brought us here. Let's fight with unwavering determination for the children who are counting on us and the families who place their trust in us. So concrete goals, measures are in progress, and hold yourself accountable to doing better than ever. Through success planning, we can ensure that success isn't just a possibility, it's a guarantee for every student and family we serve. And when we do better, hope truly lives here. Thank you.
Come on now, let's give him a round of applause for such a beautiful story. Thank you so much to Jasper and to Mr. Baxter. I appreciate you. Jasper, you didn't tell me you were going to be sharing too, so I would never try to slight you. So shout out to you two for delivering such a wonderful story. Right now, I would love to shift to the person who actually took the lead on writing this story, to Colleen. Thank you two for sharing with us. We truly appreciate it. And now we'll turn to Colleen to hear about what this process was like. All right. Colleen, are you there?
I'm here.
All right. I'm so glad to see you. And I got to give a shout out to Colleen because this is her day off, but she is so committed to this work that she showed up anyway. All right. Colleen, the big question I have for you that I want to hear about is, I know that you shared this story with your staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was the response that you got from that audience? Like, what was the physical response and how did they receive it when you shared it?
So, and you know, I get a little emotional when I do this, which is why I'm not a storyteller. But Jasper and I shared the story together, and I tried not to make a lot of eye contact because I could hear responses. And I actually heard our president, Vanessa Ward, kind of make a gasp. And I looked up at her briefly and just saw tears. And I was like, okay, no more. I can't look at anybody else. So it definitely felt like it was received in the way that I think we intended it to be received. It made people feel.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we want from storytelling, right? We wanted to evoke emotions that move people to act. I am curious. You also mentioned that you had someone that actually made a trip to your office to give you some feedback on the story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, two people commented on it, but one in particular who was in the room when Vanessa announced what we were going to be doing. She came in and sat down and asked if I had written the story, and I said yes. And she said, it took me back to that exact moment. So I knew that somebody in the room had to have, actually written it. She said it took me exactly, I could feel exactly what we felt that morning. And then a second person came and said that she was on vacation the week that that happened. But, you know, we started working really hard towards the grant after that. And she was like, gosh, when you were telling the story, it just brought all that back and how much we were just like invested in what we were trying to accomplish. So that was pretty great.
So I have to ask you, I know that this was a new framework that we learned in the pilot and you really leaned into it. Like we went through coaching sessions and your story evolved beautifully. What was the hardest part as other people are considering leaning into this storytelling? What was the hardest part of it?
For me, like I put a lot of pressure on myself to get it right and make it perfect. And I think letting go of that and just letting the story kind of guide where it went versus me trying to force it, I think that was very challenging for me, but you were great at making me do that.
Well,
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for leaning in and trusting me. I think that's something that folks don't realize, the level of trust and vulnerability that it takes with storytelling. And because we were able to develop that rapport, I think we were able to go deeper and the story was able to evolve. Now, I am curious, what advice would you give to other folks that are leaning into this as they're trying to start building this kind of culture of storytelling?
I think that's it. Trusting that process and not striving for perfection, but trusting that the story is good.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for so many of us that have that
Right.
type A personality. It's like it has to be perfect, and I'm not gonna pass it over to be coached until it is perfect. And we just have to get to that point where we can absolutely let go. The last thing I want to ask you, because I know that you're actually off today, so again, I appreciate you. My last question for you is how is your planning or how is your community planning to continue the storytelling work now that the pilot is over? How are y'all thinking about that?
So Jasper and I actually spent a lot of time talking about how we can implement like some of the tools and the practices that are in the toolkit into our staff meetings. So we're allotting time for each of our staff meetings in the coming months to start building that. And then we've also started talking about how do we get our students involved in storytelling, and potentially there is a storytelling series in Dayton, thinking through like, could we maybe get some of those students into that so they can share their own story and understand the power of their own voice.
Oh my goodness, my heart is just overwhelmed. So not only are you building it into your organizational culture, but you're actually bringing the kiddos into it. So they're leaning into storytelling. Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Colleen, for being here with us. I want to thank you, Jasper and David, for delivering such a powerful story. We appreciate you. We can't wait to continue to learn with and from you as we continue on this storytelling journey. So the middle school math teacher and me, we're going to give them a round of applause to our Omega CDC team. Give them some love in the chat. Thank you so much to that team, to our Omega CDC team. We appreciate you and value you so much. Next up, we have our colleagues from Chelsea Public Schools. All right, so as Chelsea thought about the way that they wanted to think about their story, again, they thought about using it internally and building more buy-in with their staff, but we're also going to have a moment to hear about how they modified it to actually use it in a funder meeting since the pilot ended. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Ron Schmidt, our story writer and storyteller, so we can hear your beautiful story and then engage in some Q&A after. Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Hey, thank you, everyone. We believe that every student should be known by their name, strength, and story. Because of this, our community needs to be built on relationships and trust. We are just 11 schools packed into 1.8 square miles. We may be small, but we're mighty. Chelsea is a place where resilience runs deep, where every day brings new challenges and new opportunities. It's a place where we welcome and educate all students with open hearts and open minds. And those relationships matter. They help our students feel like they belong. At one of our schools, Chelsea Opportunity Academy, students receive daily check-ins and frequently express how this outreach strengthens their commitment to school and fosters positive relationships with staff. One of our recent graduates said it best. My navigator was relentless in his belief in me. Now I too believe in myself. When students feel a sense of belonging, they thrive. But it's not just about them. Those connections remind us as educators and leaders why we do this work and why student success planning is the most important work we can do. Strong student staff relationships create a shared commitment that improves attendance, work completion, while motivating staff to go above and beyond, and at the same time, creating a healthy school community. Right now, we're being called to lead, to step up and strengthen relationships, to ensure that every student and family feels seen, valued, and supported. We've been through a lot together. During the height of the pandemic, where Chelsea was hit harder than most, we showed what it means to be a united community. We set up food centers staffed by Chelsea Public School employee volunteers, distributed thousands of meals every weekday for more than a year. We made hundreds of trust visits to families, meeting them on the streets, on corners near their homes, and supported each other in ways that define who we are. Those moments weren't just about meeting needs. They showed us the value of real relationships, not just between educators and students, but across our entire community. At one food distribution site, a parent started bringing her young children to participate and learn what it means to care for their community. Think about the countless moments when our educators go the extra mile to make a difference. These moments inspire us because they prove what's possible when we show up for one another. Vladimir, graduating after 6 years of struggling to be at school, attributed his success to a caring adult who called him every day, even when he ignored calls, sometimes for weeks at a time. This is who we are, a community that believes in relationships and finds strength in our numbers. The time is now to bring this vision to life, not just for some students, but for every single student to be known by their name, their strength, their story through building trusting relationships. Together, we have everything we need to make this difference. The passion, the know-how, the determination, but it's going to take all of us working together with urgency and purpose. Each day we wait, we risk losing an opportunity to change a child's life. Whether it's embracing the toughest challenges, like the 3 students' lives that were lost to gang violence in just 1 year, or celebrating the joy in its most beautiful moments, like when our students sang along with Boston Children's Choir and lifted our community through song. When we've seen what's possible when relationships are at the center. Our community deserves our best. It deserves our best effort, our best resources, our best ideas. They deserve a school system where every child feels seen, heard, and supported. We know that relationships are the foundations of student success and the heart of a thriving school community. But here's the thing, we cannot afford to wait. Our students face challenges that go far beyond the classroom, and we need to be there for them in ways that extend beyond the school day. That's why we're launching the Navigator Initiative, a pilot program designed to connect trained, caring adults with students and their families. These navigators will build meaningful, judgment-free relationships, ensuring that every student has someone who knows them by name, recognizes their strengths, and helps tell their story. This work is urgent. Imagine for a moment if we don't address our community's needs to be heard and their voices respected. Imagine what students will feel every time they enter their school. Imagine the impact on parents each morning as they leave their children in a place where they question if we genuinely have their interests at the forefront. We must be committed to learning, improving, and expanding our Student Success Initiative. Now imagine that same community where students and families have a navigator in their corner, listening to their voices, sharing their dreams, and supporting each in a holistic way where their needs are understood. Because here's the truth. Every student is just one caring adult away from success. And every caring adult is just one meaningful connection away from finding deeper satisfaction in their work. Experience the joy of being a navigator with just a few students. Make a call home. Begin building a relationship with students and families based on trust and genuine interest in their story. Ask parents what makes their child special. Sit with a student and learn what makes them happy. Learn what they really care about. Ask about their favorite food, music, pastimes, and share something about yourself. Ask students what we can do to better support their needs. These small moments build trust that all successful relationships are built on. Let's get to work. Begin with a few students who you know the least. Learn their names, their strengths, their stories. Share your own. Ask them how you can help them be successful in anything they're struggling with. Check in with them. Just check to see how they're doing. Share your story with a colleague. Help create momentum and be a part of something that will impact our community and truly create a positive change for all. So let's rise to the occasion. Join the Navigator team, or at least adopt the mindset of building trusting relationships. Let's lean into our shared values and build a school community rooted in trust, connection, and belonging. The time to act is now, and together we can make this vision of forming non-judgmental relationships a reality.
Thank you so much, Ron. Let's give him a round of applause for such a powerful story. Ron, I think the line that stuck with everyone, and Jeremy actually put it in here, is every student is just one caring adult away from success. That just resonates so much. What I want to ask you is, and what I've been so impressed by, is that your community was able to take this story, you made some minor revisions to it, and you actually presented it at a funder meeting. Can you tell us what that experience was like to actually use storytelling to secure additional resources?
Yeah, it just really served the purpose to set the stage and create the energy and the feeling that was needed in the room. And then we filled in all the blanks of what that money would do. And when we got to the story of now, it was like, you can be a part of this. You can help us get there. And they were like, well, they felt like they didn't have a choice. They want to help us.
It sounds like you made that sense of solidarity in the story of us, where they felt like we are coming together and there's wonderful things that we can accomplish. Now, what I want you to highlight is, I know that during that presentation, you also elevated the voice of a navigator, a parent, and a child, which was a big thing that we really tried to shed light on and encourage you to do during the pilot. How did you go about doing that, and what did that look like in the actual funder meeting?
Getting 3 people in a room, a parent that works, she had a mask on, she was a dental assistant, and we broadcast live on a big screen from her work on Zoom. And we just had, I just told them, what has it been like to have this experience? What has this relationship done? How does it make you feel different about your school? And man, they went. And the funding group had so many questions for them. And just left with, okay, we see what this does.
Can you tell me a little bit more what it was like for them to hear from the kiddo, right? To hear from an actual student what their experience was like. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, the student had a rough road and didn't feel like they were being treated fair around a couple of suspensions, and just beautifully articulated what that experience was like, from going from a space of feeling like no one was listening to someone really listened, even though no changes happened. To feel listened to changed the way she's looking at school, and everyone at the table could see that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ron. Now, I know we've talked about, as you've been continuing to think about storytelling, there's some ways in the future that you're planning to continue to implement. On just a coaching call that we had, your brain was running and you came up with some ideas just in that moment. Can you speak to kind of how you're thinking about using it with your navigators and some union conversations that are upcoming?
Tonight is our March Navigator PD, and 4 navigators will be telling their story. One, an advanced story about boundaries and what it meant to be just emotionally in a family's home, and seeing the struggle that they were going through and how to manage those boundaries. One about techniques about getting groups together, and another on what it meant to organize something big, not have a lot of people show up, but charging through as if everyone was there. So really just trying to capture best practices, but through stories, and then allowing people to ask questions, much like you're doing right now. And then the next phase of this is, I want to bring the union on board. And I want the navigators to tell their story through a public narrative to the union leaders, so that they can also get a sense of what this does for people and the impact it's having on not just our families, not just our students, but on the navigators themselves. And that was part of what our vision and actions have been about.
A powerful way to continue to build that relationship, which is often sometimes difficult with unions. I think that's a beautiful way to go about it. The last thing I have for you, Ron, is what advice would you give to new storytellers as they're thinking about leaning into this to share their impact?
You know, like anyone who's successful in trying something new, you just go do it. You practice it, you record it, you do it with a trusting colleague, and get honest feedback. But then you go for it. And much like others have said, it's not about a perfect script. In fact, try setting the script aside and tell the story. Know it that well. And it's amazing how it comes out. It never comes out the same, and it always is impactful. We've used it to set up PD for district-wide staff, and but just doing it. Go out and play.
I appreciate that, Ron. Like Nike, just do it, get on the bicycle, give it a try, and see what happens. Thank you so much, Ron. Let's give Ron a round of applause. Thank you for being here with us today and for leading the pilot. We truly appreciate you and the Chelsea School District team. Thank you. All right, last but definitely not least, we have our Orlando storytelling team. I'm going to call Abe and Mr. Belton to the screen to share their amazing story. Can't wait to hear from you. As they thought about their story, they thought about it with a funder in mind. So you'll hear the way that they've developed it, knowing that the audience is in fact that funder. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Abe and Mr. Belton.
Thanks, Chris. For the first part of the story, Bobby's going to jump right in, but I asked you just to close your eyes to possibly get a visual of what this could look like, and then Bobby will ask you to open your eyes right after the story is told. Thank you. Bobby?
The morning sun barely peeked over the skyline when Myra's phone buzzed with the first crisis of the day. She had planned to spend her morning catching up on paperwork, but in her line of work, schedules were more of a suggestion than a reality. A voicemail from Jason's probation officer played in her ear as she grabbed her coffee, rushing out the door. 9:00 a.m. Jason stood at the corner store, shifting from foot to foot, his hoodie pulled low. His probation officer had called Myra, worried. Jason had been making progress, but old habits die hard. When Myra arrived, she spotted him instantly, his gaze darting around like he was waiting for trouble. Jay, she called softly, stepping beside him. What's going on? He exhaled sharply, stuffing his hand in his pocket. Nothing. Myra wasn't fooled. She had spent too many hours listening to Jason talk about survival, about how carrying a gun made him feel safe in a world that offered him no guarantees. She didn't pry. She just stood there until he finally muttered, I don't know if this is worth it. Trying to do good when everything around me is still the same. She nodded, letting his words hang between them. I hear you, she said finally, but you're not alone in this, and you don't have to figure it all out today. She reminded him of his goals, the life map they had made together. Slowly, Jason's tense shoulders eased. After a long silence, he sighed. Can you check in later? Always, she promised before heading to her car. Her next stop couldn't wait. 11:30 a.m. Myra pulled into the school parking lot, her heart heavy. The school counselor had called her about Maria. Her grades were slipping, and today she lashed out in class. It wasn't like her. Myra had spent weeks building trust with the quiet, withdrawn girl, and she knew something was wrong. She found Maria curled up on the bench behind the school, arms wrapped around herself. Mind if I sit? Myra asked gently. Maria shrugged. For a while, they just sat. Myra knew not better than to push. Then, in a barely audible whisper, Maria said, he came home drunk last night. Myra's chest tightened. Maria had confided in her about the abuse before, but her mother had been too afraid to leave. Now it was escalating. You don't have to go back there, Myra said softly. I can help. Maria wiped at her eyes. What if she won't leave? Myra pulled out her phone. Let's talk to the shelter together. You don't have to do this alone. As Maria hesitated, Myra reached out, placing a reassuring hand over hers. You are not invisible, Maria. You matter. A single tear fell down Maria's cheek, but she nodded. Okay. 2 o'clock p.m. Myra barely had time to grab lunch before heading to Elijah's school. His principal had called. Another fight, another suspension looming. She found him in the hallway, pacing, fist clenched. Talk to me, she urged. They're always on me, Elijah spat, like I'm just some lost cause. You're not, Myra said firmly, but you need to stop proving them right. He glared at her, but didn't walk away. Look, she said, crossing her arms, you can keep fighting every battle like this, or you can channel that fire into something real. I talked to Mr. Joe. He's got an opening at the community center, a boxing program, but you gotta want it. Elijah hesitated, anger warring with something else in his eyes. You think I can? I know you can. His jaw tensed, then finally he excelled. All right, I'll try. 6 o'clock p.m. As the sun set, Myra finally circled back to Jason. He was sitting on the steps of the community center, staring at the streetlights flickering on. You still here? He murmured as she sat beside him. Told you I would be. He nodded slowly. I left it at home, he admitted, referring to the gun. Myra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's a start. Jason glanced at her. Think I can really do this? She met his gaze, unwavering. I don't think, I know. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Jason believed her. Myra's work wasn't about fixing kids. It was about showing them they weren't broken in the first place. It was about juggling time, emotions, and energy to make sure no one fell through the cracks. Because that's what Transform Orlando was all about. Turning struggle into strength, one life at a time. Please open your eyes. In a country once riddled with stories of struggle, a new narrative is being written in Orlando, one of hope, resilience, and opportunity. The success of Transform Orlando initiative is not just in the numbers, but in the lives changed. The future is reclaimed and the belief that no youth should ever be left behind. Much of the program's core staffing is funded through the City of Orlando's Families, Parks, and Recreation Department, ensuring that every child has access to dedicated student advocates like Myra. But true transformation requires more than salaries and office space. It demands the kind of investment that sees youth as individuals, not statistics. This is where the power of philanthropy, the power of us, comes in. Government funding, while essential, cannot always meet the needs that shape a young person's future in the most meaningful ways. But philanthropic donations bridge that gap, turning rigid policies into flexible, life-changing moments. Together, we don't just change lives, they transform futures. And the results speak for themselves. Graduation rates for students on the student advocates caseload have soared to 97%. School suspensions have dropped by 20%, and teen pregnancy has declined by 48.5%. Our city is no longer a place where children slip through the cracks. It is a place where they rise, are supported, and empowered. What happens when no one shows up? When there is no Myra, no Transform Orlando, no one to stand in the gap for Jason, Maria, and Elijah. Without Myra, Jason never puts the gun down. No one sees past his hardened exterior to the scared, intelligent young man beneath. There's no mentor. There's no life map. Only survival. One night, an argument escalates. No voice reminds him he has options. No hand pulls him back. The shots ring out. Another name in the headlines. Another mother burying her son. Maria stays not by choice, but because there's no way out. No emergency host home, no apartment of her own. Every day is fear. Every night is a silent plea for safety. Her grades slip, but no one asks why. Eventually, she stops going. Eventually, she stops dreaming. One day, she disappears. Just another statistic, another life lost to a system that never saw her. Elijah fights, not in the ring, not with gloves and purpose, but in hallways and parking lots. Without discipline, his rage consumes him. Expelled before junior year, there's no boxing gym, no coach, no second chance. The world tells him he's a problem, so he becomes one. The prison system welcomes another lost boy, another future discarded before it had a chance. And what if the philanthropic dollars aren't there? What if there is no flexible funding to meet youth where they are? Jason might have a mentor, but without the ability to take him out for dinner and celebrate his progress. He never experiences the simple joy of someone acknowledging his worth. Maria might escape her home for a night, but without private funding, there's no host home, no safe apartment, no stability, just a revolving door of shelters that don't lead to independence. Elijah might have Myra in his corner, but without funding for boxing lessons, his anger finds no healthy release, and the streets pull him back in. Without philanthropic support, government programs alone cannot provide what these youth need most: personalized, human centered care that adapts to their circumstances. The system remains rigid, unable to purchase the small but life changing experiences that make all the difference. And without those investments, the cycle continues. The numbers don't shift. Juvenile arrests don't drop by 57.4%. Shootings don't decline. Suspensions don't go down. The country doesn't heal. The world turns away, convinced that some people are just destined for failure. Your dollars can mean a warm meal shared between a student advocate and a bullied child, reminding them they matter. They can cover a car repair that keeps a college student employed and in school, preventing a dream from slipping away. They can provide stable housing for a survivor escaping domestic violence or clothing for a child whose only option is wearing outfits 2 sizes too small. These moments may seem small, but they are life changing. They are the difference between struggle and stability, despair and hope. And sometimes they are the one thing that transforms a life forever.
Reverend Belton, thank you for delivering a word today. Thank you for sharing that story. I appreciate that. Let's give him a round of applause. That was absolutely wonderful. I would now like to engage in a bit of conversation with Abe. I know we're running a little short on time, Abe, but I really want to lean into and ask you about as you were developing your story, one of the biggest issues that we ran into was how do you share about all of the different streams of work that you do with that differentiated approach that Transform Orlando has? Can you speak a bit about that and what that writing process was like?
That was hard at first. So to explain everything we do in a snapshot for the reader to understand it was very difficult. And so I just started to grab individualized stories. And from the team and meeting with you, Chris, we came up with this idea of creating short stories of what a student advocate's day looks like on a day-to-day basis and how they jump from place to place, meeting kids where they're at. And so that's where we came up with like, what is a student advocate? What is a navigator? What does it look like on a day-to-day basis? And giving that reader that insight to be able to see it through this story.
And I think what you do a great job is if anyone needed to understand what success planning is about, you show it from that view of the navigator or the advocate, as y'all call it, so you can understand the different things that they would do. It's like a day in the life of an advocate, right? Or like we refer to as a navigator.
Yeah.
I am curious, y'all are doing some amazing work with your CVI work, getting amazing data. As you're accomplishing great things, what role do you think storytelling can play in creating change for your community?
Yeah, so it was huge. Just to be super transparent with anyone on the call who's ever not a storyteller, I'm not either. Well, I didn't think I was. So like it was hard for me at first to put this all together. But like I just started tapping into the stories and emotion and let that emotion like kind of fill your soul and just let your fingers start doing the typing. And so Chris really helped with that. Like, hey, like we started talking about my own individual stories and growing up and some of the challenges I faced. And so like to get those emotions out, you could feel yourself like starting to tear up. And through that, it brought me to like a place like, okay, look, tell these kids stories just like you would tell your own story. And so that's where I started to feel like I'm only doing the kids a disservice if I don't give them the platform to tell their stories how it actually is, and the impact that a caring adult can make on someone's life. So that's kind of what brought out the emotion to be able to tell that overall story.
And what advice, I know you keep saying you're not a storyteller, you absolutely are, but what advice would you give to new storytellers that are thinking about engaging in this?
So I'm a data guy through and through, but like just let the feeling happen, like those tears and emotions and worries and stresses and like kind of like everything's on fire type feel to it. Like let that come out, but then also find the success in the work that's being done. And that's what I think helped me tell this overall story, is just like letting those emotions pour out, not just in what I'm saying, but what I'm typing.
Thank you so much, Abe. I
Yeah,
really
of course.
appreciate you for leaning in. Thank you, Reverend Belton. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. All right. Michelle, if we can go back to the deck. All right. So what we want to do is we want to thank our community so much for sharing their powerful stories. We do have our storytelling winners. The first one we have is Maria Panora. Maria, if you're there, if you could drop your email address, you can personal message to me. And our second winner that we have for this amazing book, I know you're not going to be able to wait to read it, is Leah. So Leah and Maria, if you could send your email to us, I greatly appreciate it. You could just drop it in the chat to me and we'll send that book out to you right away. Thank you so much for being active participants in the chat. It really makes a world of difference and creates that relational interaction. What I want to remind you with closing thoughts is that we are all storytellers. What it requires for you to remember, though, is not about perfection. It's about getting on the bicycle. You might fall off a couple times and scrape your knees, but that's okay. Get back on it, and we keep trying it, just like you saw what happened with our storytellers, Abe, Colleen, and Ron. The way you build that storytelling muscle is by practicing, and getting feedback. Storytelling is relational. And I want you to lean into the idea that storytelling allows us to reclaim our power. We cannot allow other people to tell our stories. We have to take ownership and tell the story, the narrative that we want to be in the world and how we want to share our work. And the last thing I want to say to you is be on the lookout for more resources that we plan to share to support you in your storytelling practice. The last thing that I have to say is that I have to give immense gratitude to so many different groups of people. Thank you all for being here and being part of the virtual learning series. Thank you to our pilot communities. I mean, please give them some more love in the chat. They did a wonderful, wonderful job with such moving stories, and I appreciate the love that y'all gave them. Dayton, Ohio, Chelsea, Massachusetts, and Orlando, Florida. Thank you to the EdRedesign team. I am new to the team. Y'all supported me in ways that I never could have imagined, and I just appreciate each and every one of you. And then again, thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's this community and coming together that makes a world of difference. And now I'm going to turn it back over to my supervisor, Tawhida.
I am a friend and a colleague in the work, so less of a supervisor. Chris, you have brought so much to EdRedesign and so much to this project, your passion and commitment to not only the kids that we serve and the communities that we walk alongside. So let's all shout out Chris in the chat and give Chris a round of applause for such an amazing session and for all of the work that you have done over the course of your residency. We are so proud of all of that. And just want to lift up all of the communities that presented again. Thank you for all of that. Chris has spent the better part of a year building out this strategy and really leaning into it. So we are blessed to be able to have you as a part of our team, and all of the work that you have done shows at an effort of this call and all of the amazing presentations that were done by the communities as well. We want you to please mark your calendar. We'll be sending out a save the date for our May session for our third virtual learning series, which will focus on personalization and career pathways and what it can look like to ensure that every young person has access and opportunity and a viable pathway to succeed in both school and life. So thank you all once again. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to the EdRedesign team, and thank you to the communities that presented, and thank you all for joining us today as well.